welcome to Alfie's Bar. It's not a real bar, actually. Just to be clear, this is all fake. We got to keep a clear head if we're going to do literary criticism. All right, so let's begin today with some humanities terms. Let's start with nonfiction. Now, this is a new thing we're looking at in here. First example of nonfiction. Now, fiction means made up. So, like a story that's made up, even if it's based on real things, but it's not intended to be a true account of anything that actually happened, but rather a made-up story with made-up characters and situations. And anything can happen in fiction. Nonfiction is true. It is in writing, it is writing about true stuff. And in film, it's documentary films are supposedly true. I say supposedly because that's not an uncomplicated question. Now, what I mean by that is, let's say you have a documentary film. In fact, let's go really basic. Like, say, the footage from the first or one of the first airplane flights in the early 1900s. Old black and white footage, everybody's moving like that. Now, that seems very straightforward. It's just a true documentation of what happened, because this was before movies were really made. There were some movies, but very few, around 1900. They weren't trying to make a documentary film. They just wanted to document what was happening with these planes. And yet still notice, and someone had to decide where to place the camera, when to turn it on, when to turn it off. Maybe if they switch angles, somebody had to decide that. They had to decide, what stuff to film. And so what you see is all of a sudden there's all these choices that you recognize. And even something as basic as a simple documentary accounting of a plane taking off, there's all these choices that somebody has to make. And because that's a person making those choices, therefore the person's own stuff, their own psyche, that all goes into the making of that. And so since there are choices being made, it questions this idea that it's straight truth. So if anybody ever tells you a documentary film, you must believe it because it's a documentary and those are true, they're being kind of naive, or they're trying to sell you something. The fact is, every piece of nonfiction involves choices by the writer or the filmmaker, and therefore it complicates this idea that it's a straight route to the truth. So it's just something to keep in mind. That doesn't mean, like in the airplane video, it doesn't mean that there's some bad thing going on or some conspiracy or they made choices, therefore. No, it doesn't. Once you begin to examine those choices, though, you're doing the thing we do in this class. And I encourage you to do in humanities, which is analyzing and interpreting why the choices were made, why were not other choices made, what do they choose to show you and tell you. So that's what's going on in nonfiction. And it's an attempt to get across the truth. But it is complicated. It's a complicated way to get across the truth, complicated by the fact that there's a human doing it. Okay, now guess which one was the fiction piece. Two of these are nonfiction, and one is fiction. Take a moment. Just wanted to see what you come up with. I'll do this. The one by Roxane Gay was nonfiction. That's a magazine article. You probably figured that one out. But of the other two, the one on the airplane is nonfiction, and the one about the woman in the home being confronted by the police is fiction. Now, don't get the wrong idea. Fiction can get across great truths, and sometimes fiction can be more true than nonfiction. Another discussion for another time, but it can get across great truths. But let's talk about these stories. So anger is obviously a theme that runs through all of these stories, all three of them. In Wilkinson's story called Endangered Species, that character calls it a thrum that builds inside her and other black women. And of course the word rage is used also in these various pieces. There's a great irony that is discussed in these writings, and that is this idea of anger leading to creation rather than destruction. We usually think of anger as a bad, negative thing, but as you probably know, destruction can often lead to rebuilding. It can lead to renewal. Think of tearing a building down. It involves in a way, violence. You're knocking things down, things are exploding, rubbing against each other, crashing. So that's destruction, but it leads to renewal when you put up a building that's better for your purposes. That's one of the ironies that comes up in these pieces of writing. Now let's compare and contrast the ways each of these works addresses anger. Now Hooks intends to shock. It would seem to me, I mean, she doesn't actually plan to murder. So therefore, writing about wanting to kill someone obviously wasn't written for the intention of planning an actual murder. So I would say that it's intended to shock us. Remember, O'Connor shocked readers for similar reasons. She wanted to shock you into seeing something you couldn't see otherwise, or that you may not be primed to see or resistant to. Now, here's a question. I talked about how I believe that O'Connor treats her audience with disrespect for reasons you can go back and pick up if you'd like. But is Hooks more respectful toward her audience? I would argue yes. I believe she is. The way I see the stories, the two different stories, O'Connor is more disrespectful to readers because she feels like she has to trick us, whereas Hooks is being pretty straightforward with what she believes about these issues that she addresses in her nonfiction piece. And one of the things she does is call us out for what she calls complicity. Now, maybe you hadn't heard of that word. It comes from the Middle English, and it means associated with or allied with. So it means that you may not be the main actor in whatever's going on, meaning the person doing the action, but you are enabling it to happen or perpetuating it. That would be called complicity. So if you don't stop a crime from happening, the law can charge you with complicity in that crime. They call it aiding and abetting. Even if you didn't do the deed, you can be charged with complicity. But she's arguing that when people allow injustices to happen around them and don't intervene, they are complicit in the injustice. Now, does that suggestion make you angry or uncomfortable? I think it maybe does based on some of the responses I hear to it. So if so, ask yourself why. Now, if it's simply you disagree with her, then why the discomfort or the anger at her suggestion that a white onlooker or someone who benefits from the racism is complicit in the problem? Why does that make you uncomfortable or angry, if it does? And also, if you are angry or uncomfortable at her calling this whole thing a racist incident, again, ask yourself, why the discomfort and or the anger? I mean, if someone tells me that the sky is made of oatmeal, I don't get angry or uncomfortable. It either makes no impression on me at all, or I laugh it off. Now think about that for a while. See, the benefit that I'm trying to teach you in this class of using humanities is when you feel that tug of discomfort or anger, or whatever it is, but in this case, some people express discomfort or being offended. Ask yourself why. And what about Wilkinson's fiction, Endangered Species? What kind of reaction do you think she was going for when you read her story? Now, we get her thoughts as the narrator in the story. Notice, like, O'Connor's story was told from the third person. Here's another humanities term. Third person means he, she, like the narrator, the writer says he did this, she did that, they did this, she did that. This is, Wilkinson's story is told from the first person perspective. In other words, the person, the narrator is saying, I did this, I felt that. You get a peek into the psyche and the thoughts of the person who is the main character in the story, in this case, the narrator. You see, where Hooks is angry from the start and lets you know about it, Wilkinson's story allows us to see the narrator's anger unfold and see how it confuses and outrages her. She is this complicated person with complicated thoughts about her family and her home and animals and everything, but to outsiders, she's just a black woman we've never seen before in our neighborhood, right? So we get to see her deal with this otherness, which we're going to come back to.